If you want to see how I created this letter E, stay tuned. I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Creator Massive. Alright, let's take a look at this letter E. So I've created this with a chisel brush in Procreate. The chisel brush is based on the script brush, which is a little bit transparent. I've just changed up the source of it to a chisel tip instead of a circular tip, and that's what's giving you this kind of effect. But it's really nice because it layers up and gives some interesting overlapping areas where points of interest, and as you layer it up, as you can see, you get a nice opaque, an opaquening. That's not a word, but you know what I mean. And then I'm coming back with an eraser and doing cutbacks. So that's just slicing off bits you don't need and then adding bits you want as well. So here I've come back with the script brush, which is just circular tipped, and then adding some extra bits to it. And doing these kind of work a little bit like 3D, so they push the letter out a bit. And the eraser is the same brush as the script brush that I'm using to paint now, which is the circular tip one. It works really nicely. It's got a little bit of a soft edge on it as well, so it's not too harsh. Come back to the chisel brush. Here I'm just doing a bit of manipulating of the letter. So this really helps having a digital copy of a letter, because you can just select areas of it or select the entire letter and manipulate the whole thing. So that's going to help you see all the variants of your letter without having to draw another letter as well. And the slightest little push and pull between letters can change it significantly. You'll see later on some of the adjustments I do can make a really big difference. Procreate's really nice too. It has if you draw a line and hold the pen down at the end of that line, it'll actually snap to being a perfect straight line as well, which is handy. In this section here, there's a couple of times I use it. On the curves and stuff, you do need to have a nice smooth flow, but being digital, you can always just delete it and try again. So sometimes you can pull a line, 10-15 times if you want to. I tried not to in this because it's pretty boring. Here I'm just trying to go with the flow of this, the beak of that the beak of the E, which is the kind of hook at the end, and trying to flow something that goes with that original shape. Here I'm just coming back in and cutting it. So it's kind of like an old school graffiti thing here again, which is a bit of cutbacks. I've come back and just sliced off those edges to make it nice and neat. So that little bit on the top there, that's kind of locking those two pieces together. And yeah, it's an old school graffiti type thing, just made a little bit different. And here I'm doing some inlining, so with that transparency I can come back with that brush again and just go over the top and create some interesting lines and textures and stuff over the letter. And here I've got the smudge tool, and that again you can just select whatever brush tip you want, but I started using it for the first time today and it works really well, especially with this semi-transparent stuff, because you can get overlapping lines that are unwanted in some areas or that are just a bit too much, a bit too sharp around the edges, and yeah, that can really help. Here just doing more cutbacks that can just get it looking a little bit nicer. Here's some inlining, or I don't know, just some extra little lines on the outside that can make a letter look more interesting. It's following along the same kind of path as the original letter. I'm just cutting it in a little bit earlier to make the letter look a little nicer. And just a bit more of this layering up of the heavier edges around to kind of make it look a little bit more bold. And coming back and just tightening up some little areas. Here again with the smudge tool. The smudge tool's been really handy. I'll continue to use it. It works really, really well. Here I'm gonna just add a little bit more on the outside of this letter. It was looking a little bit too flat. Some areas of the letter, when they look a little bit too boring, or that was too flat, too straight. So by adding this kind of angular break in, it helps. And here I'm just doing that same thing I did on the top of the E as well. Here I'm trying something a little bit different. I'm using the smudge tool to blend it back in instead of what I did on the other one, and I really like the way this worked out. It's a lot more natural and smooth. And and it retains that soft edge where the pixels are. If I came back and drew it in, depending on the brush, you might get really jagged pixels around the edge. Here I'm going to start to manipulate the letter a bit more, moving it around to try and see what needed to be a bit fatter. So I'm going to come back in and just select that bit individually and manipulate it, and then start to just smudge it back together there so it's nice and smooth. That works really well for connecting them back together. Depending on the way, you always want to kind of cut the letter somewhere where it's easy to join back. And after I modified that, it kind of made it look, I like the look of the letter, but it needed a little bit more balance down in that bottom corner, so I'm just trying to put a little bit of a sweeping line in there that can kind of act as a support or a footing as well, so visually it looks a little bit more solid and independent. You would maybe fill that space with a different letter if they were in conjunction with other letters. You know, that could be the bottom of the L sweeping in underneath the E if there was an L prior to the E. Before the E, whatever. And just doing a few more cutbacks. Here I'm going to start to add a little bit of some flourishes, a little bit more interest on the letter, and just to fill up a little bit of space. So, you know, again with the digital stuff, it's really nice that you can just delete it because you can come back and try a few different ones. I like the way that looks. And going to go around and find some other areas. It's going with the flow of the letter, so I'm looking at spots in the letter where it could naturally flow off, like what I just did there. Here I'm going to come in and modify the top of the E. So I feel like the middle piece of the E is sticking out a little bit too far. It looks good, but I kind of want it to look like that. I want the top part of the E to be a little bit more dominant than the middle part. So here I'm just cutting off the top part of the E so I can manipulate that independent and see the difference of just bringing it out in front of that bit in the middle. It's made it look like it has an overbite instead of an underbite, or it's kind of put the tongue back in the mouth of the E, if you will. So I like the way that looks a little bit better. I just continue to go through here and modify it a bit more. I'm going to further pull that bit of the E in just so that there's not too close of a gap. You want to watch your negative space and make sure that your letter still reads well. If you get carried away, you can lose sight and your letter can get a little bit too busy. Just make sure it still reads well in negative space as well. And here just going back over and just cleaning up some of those areas from where I just cut it in half. And this is again the smudge tool. This just really helps to blend it back together again. So I think now I'm going to start working on some little doodads and flourishes. I'm going to do another one of those little break lines here. I'm just going to figure out what kind of shape I want to connect it back together with. I'm going to go with something a little bit more angular. It looks a little bit better this way, I think. Didn't want them all to look the same. It's nice to get a little bit of variety in the letter. And here just doing some cutbacks just to get that looking a bit more interesting. Cutbacks really can make some nice shapes. Then I've just followed on from that line with a thinner version of that brush that I originally used, the script brush, and that's given it a nice little finish. And just adding a bit more of that inline as well, a bit more interesting that way, I think. You see, when you manipulate the image, when you transform it, you start to get fuzzier lines. So I'm just coming back in and just sharpening up a little bit certain areas that you want to be a bit tighter. Sometimes the fuzziness can work in just softening an area, but if you do want to bring back in some points of interest, it's nice to sharpen it back up with some cutbacks. So here I've just duplicated the layer that E's created on, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a drop shadow for it. First I'm just creating a little bit of a border, so what I've done is created another layer underneath the letter, changed the color of it, and I've just shrunken it slightly so that there'll be that difference and you can see that border pop out. Just adjust the color of it the darkness of it, or brightness of it I should say, just to get it looking nice. I've gone in and added another layer as well here, and I'm just adding some texture on it just to try and separate that letter and push it out a little bit further from the background. And here what I've done is I've locked the alpha by swiping 2 fingers to the right. What that means is nothing apart from where the pixels are affected by paint will be selected. And then what I've done is created that drop shadow. So that's just filled another version of the same letter underneath, and then I've just offset it slightly to create that drop shadow. And now I'm coming back in with the hue and saturation, or just the hue of it. I've just selected a color, dropped it in there, and then I can manipulate it through the hue selector. The nice blues worked well. And what I'm going to do now, I've basically just got the letter selected, so anything that I do is just happening to the pixels that are affected on that layer, so it's just hitting the letter itself, not the background. And I'm just playing around with some different effects here, just to see what kind of finish, texture might look good added over the top of the letter. And the good thing is you can try so many different things. There's so many more layers that you can mess around with, and if you're worried about affecting a layer, just duplicate it and make it invisible and then work on the duplicate. That way you've always got another version and you're saving along the way. Here I'm starting to think that a nice big splash right in the middle might look good. So once you've chosen a color, you can go back into the hue settings and mess around with it just to find what kind of color you're looking for. That pink looks really nice on the blue. It's kind of like a little bit of a bubblegum feel to it. Really like the color combo. It's a little bit too pink right in the middle, so I've added this other, just doing the same effect again, but then just choosing different layer effects too, just to see what works. That one there is going to end up looking the best, I think. Just drop the opacity a little bit so it's not so intense. And yeah, the letter's starting to come together and look a lot better now. And now I'm just going to start doing a little bit more details. I'm messing around with some splashes. I'm going to put some different layer effects on there too, just to see how we can get that looking. The overlay effect looks really nice. It's kind of blending well with that blue and the pink as well. But now it's just about trying to find the right kind of splash for it. These ones are looking a little bit too obvious and they don't look organic enough to be splash on it. So I end up choosing something that kind of covers the letter a little bit more, and it's a bit more all-encompassing, this one here. And then I come through, and once I've set it where I want and it's covering the area I want, I'm going to go in and erase some of the little blotches that I don't want, because I don't want it everywhere and the splash isn't perfect, so just manipulate it a little bit until you get it looking nice. And then I'm coming back with the pink on a layer above, which is the same overlay layer, so it's giving these nice effects. It's not so solid, it's retaining all the information from underneath, it's just laying the color over the top as well. So just doing a little bit more of that, just experimenting with layering up the pink and the blue. And yeah, now I've gone and just selected the script brush with the same color, and I'm just messing around with some effects on top just to see what kind of thing I can do. I quite like how these strokes are looking. Getting some interesting effects by putting the pink over the blue and vice versa. A lot of this stuff is just kind of coming to be at the time. I'm not really thinking about what I'm doing, I'm just giving it a shot. Here I thought I'd put a little logo in the corner. I end up deleting it anyway, but I'm just messing around here. So again, I've locked a layer with the alpha lock, which is the two fingers swiped to the right of the layer, and it'll lock the alpha, and then you can select a color, click the layer, and then hit fill layer, and it'll drop it in like that. You can color it, or if it's already a color, you can just go to hue and you can manipulate it that way. There's quite a few ways around it, but I just deleted it. I don't think it looks good. Now I've come back with another layer on top. There's no layer effect, there's just that pink that I've sampled from the middle of the letter, and I'm just trying out some little things just to see what works. give a few things give like a lot of different things a try and see what works for you. Here I really like the way the blue's looking. This is on an overlay layer as well, so it's going to retain some of the texture from underneath. I'm just going to figure out the best way to lay it down. I was thinking of doing just the edge and, you know, like a little bit of a 3D edge on it. Don't think it looked good, so I came in with just these like single stroke with a bent corner, you know, a little jagged sweep in, and I really liked the way these looked. So I ended up leaving that, trying a little bit out on the bottom, but it's quite busy already down the bottom, so there's a lot of interest in that space just due to the splash. So I didn't want to do too much on there, or there'd be too many things competing. Here I was just trying out a little bit of a different texture on it, but I think it looks good just the way it is. The letter's pretty much finished now, so yeah, that's just a little bit of tweaking just to see what I could do in the background, but yeah, that's how we do it. If you like what you saw in today's episode, hit the thumbs up button and give us a like. If you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button and you'll stay up to date with everything I'm making. Thanks a lot for stopping by, and we'll see you next time on Creator Massive!